I'd like to move on now, please, to the next item on the agenda, which is the draft directions for the Health and Social Care Information Centre. I'll invite Tim to speak to this in a moment, but just to record for the record that there has been a letter received by the board from Med Confidential. I'll ask Tim to address those issues in the letter, but also given the highly technical nature of some of the issues, Tim, what I propose to do is I will write formally back to Med Confidential, giving assurance on all the points raised by them. So please don't feel obliged to go into every detail this morning. Tim, over to you.
Well, actually, it follows, I think, very nicely from that excellent presentation, because one of the most important benefits of what's called care.data, which at this stage is a programme to link general practice data with hospital data, will be to provide us with precisely those demographic benchmarks that will help planning and commissioners in different parts of the country understand much more deeply what kinds of patient behaviours are in common between them and other localities. So that we lack that in a consistent and way across the country, and that's a very important justification for this programme. But essentially, just to remind the board, so care.data, as I say, is about linking GP and hospital data, and we're doing that because we need to do it, because actually without it, patient care is not as good as it could be. We know, for example, that we have issues in this country, very serious issues around late diagnosis of cancer, and we know people who are diagnosed with certain kinds of cancer late are less likely to be treated satisfactorily, and survival rates are reduced as a result. And if we are able to link GP and hospital data, we will be able to support those GPs who are perhaps not identifying cancer as early as they might, and support them to improve their the survival rate for their own patients. So just to make the point, this is very much about clinical quality, patient care, right here, right now, and also, of course, it's about commissioning, transforming models of care as we understand patterns of integration, how best to serve local communities, and then finally, it's also about research and how we can improve the opportunity for the NHS to be at the cutting edge of science and deliver to its patients new generations of medicines and treatments. So for all those reasons, we are, I hope, and certainly very committed to care.data. But care.data is also about testing, really, a new standard of ensuring that citizens are aware of the rights they have in relation to use of their own data when it's not for direct care. And so, as the board will know, the government has proposed to introduce an opt-out. In other words, citizens will have the right to opt out of their data being shared for reasons other than direct care. And we part of the process that's described in these directions, and I'll briefly outline, is to make sure we understand what standard is appropriate for communicating those rights, that right of opt-out to patients. In doing so, we are going to be setting a new bar for data controllers in the NHS to meet. The programme was suspended last year, as the board will remember, because there were, I think, very legitimate concerns about the degree of transparency of uses to which that data would be put, and also of safeguards in relation to confidentiality and ensuring people were aware of their rights. So for the last year or so, the team has been engaged, and the team, by the way, involves teams from many different organisations, has been involved in redesigning the programme in a very co-produced fashion. More than 3,000 members of the general public have, in nearly 200 events around the country, contributed to redesign of the whole scheme. And we are now in a position where 4 areas of the country have volunteered, GPs in 4 areas have volunteered to test the communications that have been developed, the new approach to ensuring people are aware of their rights. And those areas, that's in total 6 CCGs in 4 parts of the country, are now planning to start those tests. Just to remind people at the board again, and those watching, that this is just a test. We are trying to understand whether we have hit the right standard, and the Secretary of State has invited Dame Fiona Caldicott, the National Data Guardian, to review progress against in that test in the early autumn. Broadly, will be the timetable, and it will only be subsequent to both her advice that we have achieved an appropriate standard of communication with the public, and also, of course, of this board's view, and indeed the Secretary of State as well, that we then proceed, if we do, to extraction of data in those pathfinder areas, so that we can demonstrate that there is real value of the sort I've just described in health and care. So this is going to be quite not cautious, a slow but deliberate process to really establish very transparently that we have achieved standards which we can all agree are appropriate for such an important project. These directions relate only to the Pathfinder programme. So the directions are to specify for the Information Centre, the Health and Social Care Information Centre, what data we would want to be extracted in the event that Dame Fiona, this board, and the Secretary of State have given their approval for the extraction to proceed. And I just wanted to highlight one or two quite important points about these directions for the board's benefit. So the first thing to say is that we will be testing in this process a public opt-out, a citizen's right to opt-out, which means, just to be absolutely clear, that if somebody does exercise their opt-out, no clinical data will be extracted from their general practice. That's just to make that point absolutely clearly. Secondly, that given the importance of ensuring public confidence as we begin to make the case for data sharing in healthcare of this sort, we have limited access to the data, should it be extracted at the end of the Pathfinder phase, in the Pathfinder context, to just 4 organisations. So that's NHS England, Public Health England, the Health and Social Care Information Centre, and the CQC. And that those 4 organisations will only be able to access it for analytic purposes in a safe, a secure environment that has been developed by the Information Centre. So there will be no third-party hosting of the data that flows from the extraction. In the event that, again, Dame Fiona, this board, the Secretary of State, the Board of the Information Centre, is persuaded that there is merit in the data analysis that proceeds from the Pathfinder extraction, and that we've achieved an appropriate standard of what's called fair processing, but explaining to people their rights, then it may well be that we move to a programme of national rollout. In that case, this board will have to agree a separate set of directions. So I just want to make the point that this is not signing off anything other than a process to test communications and for a conditional approval on extracting data subject to the safeguards I've just described. So hopefully that at least opens the ground for a conversation if the board wants clarification.
Good. Thank you very much, Tim. Comments from the board? Kieran.
Thanks. I chair the advisory group, as you know, so let me try and reflect where I think we were coming from, not the programme board, just to make sure we're clear on the distinction. I mean, first of all, we're in a very different place to where we were in the past. I think taking things slowly and deliberately, as Tim described it, I think it's been important, because it's the realisation that this is new territory, this is precedent, and this is something we have to get right, not only for this particular programme, these Pathfinders, but generically as well. So I think that is the starting point of the advisory group. So things like the safe setting, physical building being built to make sure that everything is as robust as possible for the Pathfinders, is a good thing to do. The major issues around fair process, opt-out, dissemination, I think we're in a much stronger place than we were. We do have to recognise that one of the consequences of having a Pathfinder approach is, as Tim was describing, directions will change in the future. So if we're going to have truly fair process, one of the things we have to get right in the Pathfinders is making sure people understand that the directions that we're operating under, for example, the set of data that's extracted and who can use it in the Pathfinders will both be subset of the data that will be extracted and who can use it in the future. So it sounds like a very technical thing, but if we are going to be true to this thing about fair process, then we have to make sure in the Pathfinders that we do that. So, for example, at the advisory group we had last week, one of the things we were saying is that in the communication of the process going forward, we have to make sure, for example, that further directions, we flag the fact that there will be further directions and they will be changed in how we describe these directions. So if somebody goes on the website and says these are the directions, we're overt in saying, and subject to what Fiona Caldecott decides, these things may move in a different way, but that process will itself be transparent. So for me, I think, should we approve the directions? Yes, we should, subject to a few things. Malcolm, you've just offered to respond to the letter. I think some of the, there's some typos which have been picked up. I think we need to be clear that not all the pathfinders are proceeding at the same pace, so leads will be later. Let's make sure that the schedule reflects that. Let's make sure that we're absolutely sure that the things which will change in future are flagged in an appropriate way. But I think the advisory group would say we're in a very different place. The Pathfinder approach is absolutely correct. Look forward to making sure they operate as well as possible, that we extract the learnings from that, and then make sure that if and when anything further happens, that the learnings are truly built into it. So, with those caveats is probably too strong a word. With those comments, I think, for me, yes, please.
Thank you, Kieran. Other? Noel?
I wanted to pick up on Kieran's point about pathfinders, Tim.
Yeah.
And let's accept the approach is the right approach. What is it we seek to learn from the Pathfinder approach that will guide us in the decision later about whether this becomes a national approach? I mean, what are the top 3 objectives we seek to achieve?
So Dame Fiona has set a series of kind of standards that she expects the Pathfinders to demonstrate in relation, for example, to supporting GPs to be able to discharge this rather complex communication responsibility that they have under the law in any case, but on one level. On another level, how have we demonstrated that people have adequately understood the right to opt out? How do we demonstrate that as well? How do we make sure that populations who are relatively hard to reach, although maybe listed with GPs, are also made aware of their opportunity to opt out? So there are various. Perhaps it may help if I forwarded this to the board if it's not already been, but it is in the public domain. But I'll forward the letter she has written to me as senior responsible owner for the programme, describing what sorts of standards she would expect us as a programme to meet, and we've discussed it, of course, with the advisory group. So that lays out a number of quite specific, tangible objectives, which we then need to evaluate in light of the Pathfinder experience. And actually, I'm sorry because my notes I've read my notes in the wrong order, but could I just say how grateful we are to the Pathfinders, the leadership, not just the individual GP practices, but to the clinical commissioning group chairs and clinical leads who have honestly really embraced this in a way that I think's just demonstrated to me the importance of its absence to them in executing their own responsibilities. But they have worked really closely on working out how best they think they can demonstrate those standards being achieved. And there's been an awful lot of work that's gone on with Health Watch, with CCGs, with local GPs, just to try and make practical some of the perfectly legitimate standards that Dame Fiona has kind of proposed. But I'll forward that letter. Could I also, if it's okay, Chairman, just thank Kieran for his great commitment in chairing the advisory group, and also to all its members who represent, I think, a very important set of voices. And to be fair, those voices have been challenging, very robust. It's a very frank conversation, but thank you to them for helping us collectively, I hope, make some progress.
Okay, well, thank you, Tim. Before I put the question to the board, I think it's just important for us to be clear that this is a programme in which we've invested a great deal of time and thought in its development. We would only do this if we believed that it was absolutely critical in the interests of patients, that this was something that would give us the information and the intelligence that we need to more finely attune not only our commissioning practice, but also to get real-time intelligence about how how patients' lives are lived, how treatment work, and how we can better provide for their care. I don't think that that is any longer a matter of huge controversy. The issue is how do we sensitively attune ourselves to issues around patient data confidentiality. And that is what the question is before the board. What I'd like to do first of all is to propose that you will authorise me to respond in detail and to thank Med Confidential for their comments, but to respond in detail to the issues that they've quite rightly raised. That secondly, that you will approve in principle the directions that are before you, but also delegate to the Chief Executive and to myself to do final approval on behalf of the board once we've had an opportunity to take into account the comments from Med Confidential and any other issues. But the substance of the directions I would anticipate would remain unchanged. Is the board content to proceed in that way? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim and Kieran.